Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week, we're going to have a big episode. We're going to talk about digital routing. And in this case, we're going to talk about how you can connect one digital board to two digital snakes and then to another console that you can use for a monitor console or for broadcast. It's going to be a big show, so strap in. Let's go for it.
Hey, what do you say? Yes, it's that time again. It's Tech Tuesday.
So before we get to the meat of what today is about, I just want to talk about some concepts of what we're doing here, and in particular some of the, I guess you could say, terminology that I'll be using. It's really quite simple when you think about it. But when you talk about routing, you really need to talk about your signal like it's water flowing through pipes. So in the analog world, it was really easy. You could visually see, okay, if I plug my microphone into channel 1 on the snake, then channel 1 can plug into channel 1 on the mixer, and now my microphone has gone from here to the snake to the mixer, and you can control it on channel 1. That is still the case when it comes to digital consoles, but it's a little bit different because you don't necessarily see visually how everything is working. So you have to think about, okay, if this were the analog world, how is that sound eventually getting to where it needs to be? And that can just be just something you have to work your way through. So the easiest way to get there is to always think about your sound flowing like water through pipes. So again, the microphone to the cable, to the snake, to the mixer, out that channel, out to the speakers, so on and so forth. Now, in that same scenario, you've got a analog snake that is at front of house on one end and on stage at the other. You've got sound going through the snake to the board, and then the board is sending sound generally back through the snake out to the speakers. So that concept is still going to be the same, but one thing that's pretty amazing but can be confusing is that instead of using this really thick analog snake, we're going to be using a very thin, Cat 5 or Cat 6 snake. So you can see right here, this is essentially a beefed up version of what your computer is using to connect to the internet, like your router or your computer if you're using a hardwire. But if you look on here, it's got a what's called EtherCon connector. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on the video. It kind of looks like a mic cable from a distance. All that is, it's still essentially a Ethernet cable on the inside, but it's got this more sturdy jacket on there, so you're less likely for it to get pulled out if the tab goes bad or anything like that. Now, this cable is sending, in today's example, we're using a Behringer X32 and the S16 digital snakes. This is sending 48 channels of audio at DVD quality one direction from the snake to the board, and then the board, just like with an analog snake, is sending signals back through the same cable, another 48 channels that's going from the board back to the snake, and then that can go out to the speakers around the room, or in this case, we're going to go to another console. So the terminology is going to get a little bit confusing if you let it get away from you, because you'll see that the same cable is going to show up on our diagram in two different spots. So one is going to be sending one direction, and one will be sending another direction. So as you get going on this, so you don't get confused, just always be thinking water flowing through pipes. So the water flows from your bathroom to the facility where it's being treated, and then maybe it flows from there to the ocean or back to your house as treated water. So if you always think about sound like that, it'll help you out a lot. So little things like if you were plugging in a speaker for your sound system, I wouldn't say I'm going to plug the speaker into the snake, because you don't have sound going from the speaker to the snake. It's the other way around. I'm going to plug the snake into the speaker. It might sound weird, but if you talk like that, it'll help you to understand how your sound is working, and then if something goes wrong, how to fix it. So let's start by taking a look at the gear that we're going to be talking about. and how it's going to all connect physically, and then we'll start to explain how the sound flows through those channels using this. So we're looking at a diagram here. Here's our quick little legend here. You can see the blue arrows are referring to front of house audio, so the sound from our inputs that will eventually come back to the snake to go out to our speakers. So that's our blue signal here. And then our yellow signal here is going to come from the front of house desk, which is this guy here, and then flow alongside, but eventually come out and go to the monitor or broadcast console that is over here. So the way that's happening, if you'll notice, underlined and bold, we have A outs and A ins and B outs and B ins. So all these devices that we're talking about today have an A connection and a B connection. So let's take a look at that and see what that looks like physically. Rather than have an actual console here, I'm going to try and make this easier for you to see by using images. So this is the back of a Behringer X32 console. And a Midas M32 would be very similar as well. And the reason why I'm using this console again is one, a lot of churches have them right now, and two, it's a fairly simple way to get into digital mixing. For better or worse, they have simplified your options into groups of 8. Which in some ways isn't great, but it does make it easy if you're trying to learn for the first time, so you can know, rather than having 32 different things to change around, you've only got like 4 or 5 different things you can change. So looking at this board, let's talk about what kind of inputs you have on here. These are your local inputs, meaning your preamps that are built into the board itself. This is what you would normally use, but we are going to be disconnecting them today because we'll be using these guys right here. This is the AES 50 ports, and again, there's an A and a B. So we're going to use the A in and out from the main mixer here. You also have your analog outputs. These will be mirrored by what we're sending, again, through this A connection to the digital snake. Today we're looking at the S16 digital snake, and there's going to be 2 of them. You can see on one unit there are 16 ins and 8 outs. We're going to talk about if you had 2 of these chained into each other, so a total of 32 inputs and 16 outputs. Looking at the rear of this device, you will see, very much like the board, you've got an AES in A, and I'm sorry, that's an in and out A, and a B. So if we were to connect 2 of these boards together, we would go from the mixer, so out of A of the mixer, into A of the first snake, out of B of the first snake, is going to be a short cable going into A of the second snake. And then finally, out of B of the second snake is going to go to our second console. I've got a picture here of a X32 rack. This is a really good option if you're just using this for ears and don't necessarily need all the faders if maybe the band is mixing their own ears. So again, it would come out of B on the second rack and eventually end up at A on the X32 rack or X32 console. Any of these devices will work for a final destination. So again, that gets a little bit confusing because there's a lot of sound going in and out. So let's talk about the overall signal flow, and then we'll go into what that looks like on the board, how you tell all this stuff where to go. So starting from our signal source, which is in this case a microphone, we're going to imagine this microphone here is plugged into channel 1. So on your digital snake, you've got 32 inputs because we've got 2 digital snakes that are paired up together. And then we're going to start going counterclockwise here. Out of the out of the snake through the AES port A, it's going to go to the front of house console. Now, what this is showing you right here, and notice it says Cat6.1, and this guy also says Cat6.1. These are the same cable, but this is referring to the signals coming from the snake to the board, and this guy is referring to the signals coming from the board back into the snake. So again, coming from the snake, as a default, channels 1 through 32, and again, there's 48 channels of audio flowing this direction. The first 32 channels are the inputs from the snake. So if my microphone is plugged into channel 1, on the snake, it's coming through channel 1 to the board. Once it gets to the board, then you can receive that information. We're going to show you how to do that in a moment. And you can then send information, again, through that same cable back to the snake. So what's going to happen over here is we're going to send, as a default, outputs 1 through 16 are going to come down those 48 channels through channels 1 through 16 to the snake. And you can see this is red because these are our outputs, which ends up at our physical outputs in red over here. So again, that's going to be your outputs here. So that's what's going to go to your speakers, your stage monitors, anything that's got a physical output that needs to come from the stage. So you've got your sound going through there on the first 16 channels. And then this green guy right here is, again, our 32 inputs from the S16. So what started here, came through here, ends up here. The board is going to tell those to come out channels 17 through 48. And the reason why we're doing that is because, again, those first 16 channels, we want those to be the outputs to the snakes because that's how the snakes are going to read it. But what's going to happen with these guys is this is a mirror image of what is going to the front of house board. And that's going to flow through on this yellow line here and go through the snake, come out and go into the monitor or broadcast console in the end. And so you can see this information here is the same as this information here. So it's outputs and inputs, red and green. So it's a lot going on, but again, just think sound flowing out of the snake through the cable to the board. The board's going to just change where things are going, but the same information plus output information is then going to go through the cable back to the snake. The output information is going to come out to your physical speakers, and then the other information through what you're getting for your inputs is then going to go to the monitor console, where the monitor engineer or broadcast engineer can do essentially whatever they want to that without affecting front of house, without front of house affecting them. The only thing in this situation that will affect both consoles is the analog gain that front of house is doing. So again, go back and watch the gain videos. Very, very important. You have to have that set correctly from the start so that you don't have any issues going on from there. So now let's take a look at, we'll refer back and forth to the chart, but we're going to show you on the X32 at both stations how to set this information so that you're reading and sending that information correctly. So you'll see that we have two charts here. I've got a label at the top here, front of house, FOH. So that's what the crowd is hearing. And then we've got monitors, or it could be a broadcast console. You could even hook up another console, have one for broadcast, one for monitors, using the same technique. So really cool, the flexibility that you get with this board doing this. So let's start by looking at front of house. And what we want to do is we want to set how the board is reading the inputs coming from the snake. So again, let's take a look at a picture of the back of the board. You've got options here. You can receive signal from the local inputs, which is how your board comes from the factory, or from AES-A or AES-B. So looking at our board here, we're going to go to our routing tab. And it says home, But home is really for your input. So you can see you've got these groups of 8 going on that are inputs 1 through 8, 9 through 16, 17 through 24, all the way up to 32. All these other tabs here are actually outputs. So on this first tab, I've got this set to where you can see what the board looks like when you first start. So it's saying my first group of 8. So if I've got channel 1 on my board, channel 1 is coming from, this case, local 1. So the physical input on the board labeled 1 is what you would be hearing if you were to plug in right now. But that's not what we want, because our signal is coming from the digital snake. It's coming through port A, so we're going to click A 1 through 8, and then we're going to go down the list. So A 1 through 8, 9 through 16, 17 through 24, and then up to 32. So now the board, if I'm looking at channel 1 on the board, what it's seeing is channel 1 on the digital snake. So if my microphone is plugged in there, that's what I'm going to hear when all is said and done. So we've got our signal coming through to the board. And now what we need to do is we need to say, okay, coming down that same channel, that same cable, how am I going to get that same signal, a duplicate of these inputs here? How am I going to get them to come through these channels so we can go on to the other board? So to do that, we're going to go to our tab that says AES50A. So again, that's referring to the A port on the back of the console. As a default, it's going to give you this right here. So we've got outputs 1 through 8 and 9 through 16, which is correct. That's what we want to go to our digital snakes. But as a default, the next 2 groups here are the same thing. Again, 1 through 8, 9 through 16. And the last 2 are P16. So if you happen to use the personal monitors, that's how those channels eventually get to that destination. Since we have a monitor console in this case, we wouldn't be using P16s. And if we were, they wouldn't come off the front of house console. They would come off of the monitor console. So all that information is going to change. So we're going to keep these the way they are. And again, referring to my chart here, you can see that's correct. 1 through 16 and 1 through 16 are the outputs. But now we need to change these guys, 17 through 48, to be what's coming from 1 through 32. So we're going to send out channel 17. We're going to send AES 1 through 8. So the information that we did receive through here is now going to come out through here. See how the signal's flowing through these things. So 1 through 8, 9 through 16, 17 through 24, 25 through 32. So again, if my microphone is plugged into channel 1, it's going to go through all these things, and then coming back through the cable to the digital snake, it's now coming through channel 17. All we've done is we've added 16. And this is all going to kind of be less confusing once we get to the final destination. So that information is flowing through here. The outputs are doing their job and going out to the speakers. And then this information is going to go through the snake, come out the B output on the snake, so the very last connection, and then go through to our second digital console. Now, let's take a look at that console. So this guy over here. And again, let's go to our routing tab. And again, it's currently set to what the default would be. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this to receive what's coming through the digital snake. Now, I can't do exactly what I did on the front of house board because, again, AES-A 1 through 8 and 9 through 16 are receiving the outputs. So if your left speaker is coming out of channel 15 and your right speaker is coming out of 16, that's what you would get. You wouldn't be getting the bass guitar that's supposed to come through or the electric guitar. So these guys need to start on channel 17 because that's where our 1 through 32 are starting. So we'll do 17, 25. We're just going down the list again. And now here's what's cool. As confusing as this might be, if this is new to you right now, notice, so we had our microphone was plugged into channel 1. By the time it got to this board, it was coming through the snake on channel 17. But what the board is seeing on channel 1 on the monitor console is what's coming from channel 17. So again, if you look at the board, our microphone, in this case, if you look on here, this was set up for kick drum. Kick drum plugged into channel 1 on the snake, ends up on channel 1 on the first board, goes through the snake to the next console on channel 17, but by the time it reaches the second console, it's going to be coming through channel 1 again on the board. So it's not going to be that confusing. Once you have all this stuff set, it's going to be the same thing. What's on channel 1 on board 1 is going to be the same thing on board 2. So it'll end up being, it'll make sense in the final end here. Now, I want to take a quick look at this. This is a pretty cool little trick here for you. So right now, the only signals that are shared between the two boards are only what is plugged into the digital snakes. So channels 1 through 32 on the snake. But let's say you have other things, like, for example, really common, if I'm talking to a microphone at front of house, a talkback microphone, and I want to be able to talk to the band to tell them, hey, I need the drummer to play now, I need the bass player to play now, whatever it is, the pastor's walking on stage. I need a way to send this microphone through the board to the monitor console. And because it's not plugged into one of the 32 channels on stage, currently I don't have a way to do that. But there is a way with this aux-in remap here. On your front of house console, you would want those aux inputs to be your actual aux-ins coming in. So that'll be for like your PurposeCenter computer, a DVD player, whatever it is you have plugged in to the 1/4-inch inputs on the back of the board. That's really unnecessary on the monitor console. So what we're going to do instead, we're using up channels 17 through 48. But what I want to do here now is you do have the option of using on the auxiliary ends up to 1 through 6 coming from the other console. Now, what that is, again, referring back to our chart, is that is 1 through 6 of these outputs here. So that's really cool, because that could mean if you wanted to, you could have up to 6 different mixes that you can send from the front of house console to the monitor console. So you could have one be for a talkback microphone, or whatever else it is. Maybe you're playing tracks from front of house and you need to be able to get that information to the ears of the guys on stage. That is how you can do that. So that's really cool. So we now have 40 channels that are coming, well, really 38 channels that are coming from front of house to this board. 32 of them are what's coming from the snake, and then 6 of them are coming from outputs on the front of house console. Really cool, really, really useful. And again, if you had a broadcast console and a monitor console, you could potentially, go through and send all this information again to the other console. And you can chain a whole bunch of these if you really wanted to, but this is a really useful thing. We've used it for an event we just did, and it worked very well. Finally, anytime you have more than one digital device connected, there's something called clocking, or synchronization, as Behringer calls it, where you need to say, of these devices, only one can be a master and the rest have to be a slave. So for you to set that up correctly, what we usually do is we set the front of house console to be a master. So let's look at our front of house console. We're going to click on the Setup tab and go to our Global tab. Now this is global, so this is one of the only things that can, if done incorrectly, can mess up your console like you can't just load a scene and fix this. So very important that you understand how this works, and if you're not doing this kind of thing, don't mess with it. So you've got sample rate. To keep it real simple, 48K, which we have right here, is DVD quality. 44.1 is CD quality. So we're going to keep it at 48. And our synchronization or clock source, we're looking at the front of house console. We want that to be internal. So that means that console is saying, I'm telling the audio when to come and go. I'm controlling all the sound as it is. So we're going to keep that guy there. I don't have an S16 for you to see right now, but you can see. You've got a couple options here. These bottom options, when selected, will tell the board, tell the S16 to receive clock source, not to create it. So that's SN master is synchronization master. We want it to be a slave. So we would select for it to be one of the default options when you first connect these. So the clock source is going to go from front of house to the S16s, from one to the other, and then it's going to end up at your second console or third console if you have however many. And you will need to do on that guy, again, go to Setup and Global. And if you notice on here, it's not set to internal because you can't have two masters in this case. It's receiving through its A port that clock source. So again, that clock information is going from the front of house console to Snake 1, Snake 2, out, and then to the second console. And then that's what it's listening to, is that same information. That way everyone's on the same page, everyone's getting the same information, good to go. I hope this has been helpful for you. I know this is a lot of information, and it's a lot of conceptual. I can't see it, but I have to understand how this gets from here to here. There will be a link in the description with this chart so you can take a look at it on your own time and just kind of mull it over. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. You can leave a comment below on our YouTube page, or you can email me at TechTuesday@ascensionworship.com. And I'd love to answer any questions you have for you, or if you have suggestions for new shows. We'd love to make sure this is useful for you and for your church. Until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.